Hello everyone, my name is Mike and welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today we're continuing having a look at historical videos on YouTube, and today we're continuing with Sabaton. So I've subscribed for them since I've last started watching these videos to try and stay updated on the newest songs coming out, and this one premiered actually earlier today, and it's Livgardet. And when I saw that in the recommendations, or in the subscription box rather, that it was premiering, it piques my interest because as well from the thumbnail it appeared as one of the band members. Apologies, I still don't know actually their names, so if you could correct me in the comments about those, that would be great. But he seemed to be wearing Swedish military uniform, like from like the Caroline period. And so immediately I started thinking this is about Sweden, given that Sabaton is a Swedish band. And then as the song came out, I was really excited, and then promptly realised it's in Swedish, which I don't speak. So I do have the lyrics beside me, but from having a quick brief have a look through the lyrics, it appears to be about the lifeguards, which I'm really excited about. I think lifeguards, generally speaking, are a really cool infantry regiments, regardless of what country they come from. Obviously, Household Cavalry is descended from some of those lifeguards as well, of my own country, and plenty of other countries have their own versions. In fact, one of my friends is actually serving in the Swedish military. He is actually part of what has now become the Swedish lifeguards. That's the amalgamation of the different units. So without further ado, I don't want to get into it because again I just skimmed through the lyrics and I don't want to get into this too much, so rather I'm just going to be watching along with the video with the lyrics beside me, and then at the end of choruses, like I usually do when I'm listening to Sabaton songs, try and fill in the gaps where I can. But without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? So there we go.
Livgardet står, grundat av landsfader vår, hängiven tjänst i 500 år. Fråntaget övervält, stred vi runt på Narvas fält, det följa ut i hjältars spår. Smitt av eld och dalablod, frusen mark och hjältemod i en tid av krig det stod. Anor från blott 16 man, rikets äldsta stridsförband. En tid av krig, vart vägen än bär, att beskydda gardets svär. För konung och rike det viger sitt liv. Knä och knä Livgardet går, kämpas för landsfader vår, hängiven tjänst i 500 år. Fråntåget övervält, stred vi runt på Narvas fält, det följa ut i hjältars spår.
Okay, so intense arguing over a table currently. But yeah, so obviously you have them dressed in the attire, and so having just a look through the lyrics, if you're like myself and not a native Swedish speaker, then the translation I have here is devoted. Oh, there we go. So, honor the lifeguard stands, founded by the father of the country, devoted service for 500 years, from train across the belt, the Battle of Lund, on Narva's field. They follow in the footsteps of heroes, infected by fire and dollar blood, frozen ground and heroism. In a time of war they stood, ancestors of only 16 men, the kingdom's oldest combat unit. A time of war, which I think is where the verse comes in. Wherever the road carries, to protect the guard swears, for kingdom and king they dedicate their lives. Knee if knee the lifeguard goes, fought for the father of the country. Dedicated service for 500 years, from the train across the belt, struggle at Lund and Narva's fields. They follow in the footsteps of heroes, no matter who wears the crown. To their king fidelity swears, in a time of peace, they exist traditions of the past. So again, I'm going off of translation that I found online, so if that is wrong, and if any of you are native Swedish speakers, then please do correct me, because I haven't got a clue. I'm going particularly for this. But, so the important thing to know about lifeguards as a whole, not just Swedish lifeguards, but lifeguards in general, is their name suggests their job at their basis is to guard life, namely that of the monarch or head of state or something like that. And the Swedish lifeguards, I know relatively little kind of about Swedish history in general, except from kind of the period that we're talking about, like the Deluge, the Northern Wars and stuff like that. And with that, as well as the song lyrics suggest, that devoted service for 500 years, the Swedish lifeguards is, what I know, one of the oldest continuous military units in history in terms of continuous service. They've been going for 500 years, and I believe they was founded mid-16th century. I might be wrong, but I think it's a similar time, because they predate the English horse guards, the first troop of horse guards and stuff like that in my own country by, I think, a few decades, and so that would put them before them. But please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. So again, as always, I'll try and fact check after this has gone up and correct any of my inaccuracies in the comment section below. When it says about the train across the Belt and the Battle of Lund, the Battle of Lund is one of the kind of numerous battles that Sweden has had with its neighbour. In the Battle of Lund particularly is when Sweden fought against both the Dutch and the Danish Norwegians when they was kind of federated together. But yeah, so 16 men chosen as bodyguards, as it says, descended from 16. And again, this harks back to various traditions that other lifeguards actually have, and that is that generally they descended from a certain class. And with the Swedish lifeguards, it was a similar thing. These were 16 men who were chosen, ably bodied men who would be served as bodyguards. And again, previously, as I said, this would have a similar kind of effect with both the British horse guards, as I previously said, a few decades later with the first and second troop of horse guards. Around the similar time as well, you'd have the Danish having a similar type of lifeguard system where they'd have able-bodied men go and serve and basically dedicate their lives in the protection of the monarchy. And of course, possibly one of the more well-known ones out of all of them, particularly if you're talking about later periods, is the Russian Livgardet, the Russian Imperial Guards, who were lifeguards, but obviously, unlike necessarily some of the others, they went on to form like entire corps under themselves, under Peter the Great. And you know, that kind of role of protecting the monarch was still shown when, during peace times, the Livgardet were stationed in St. Petersburg, in the palace in St. Petersburg, rather, during peacetime, which I assume would be a similar place with the Swedish lifeguards, presumably in the palace around Stockholm or somewhere, wherever the royal residences are. Because one thing that I do know is Gustav Adolphus, who's probably the most famous Swedish, well, I think possibly up there with one of the most famous Swedes in history. He took them wherever he went, basically, in Europe. And for those of you who don't know, I'm rambling a little bit here, not necessarily talking about the song, but Gustav Adolphus is possibly one of the most recognised and revered military commanders of his era, really, so to speak. Swedish, he kind of revolutionised them. For many people, he's kind of seen as incorporating what's considered the first modern army, and by this combined arms of, you know, moving people around with cavalry and infantry together, working in unison, along with, you know, with the technology that's coming around at the time. And it's really under Gustav Adolphus that kind of Sweden becomes this great military power, particularly following his victories in the 30 Years' War, like this force to be reckoned with, ultimately until his death in the 30 Years' War, the Battle of Lutzen. So, yeah, I don't want to ramble too much because I still have the second verse to go on here, and again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm looking at the lyrics now, and let's have a look.
Oavsett vem kronan bär till sin honung trohet Sverige tid ner i tiden dit konungen går. De gör vad som synes omöjligt på den framtidens spår.
Okay, so there we go. So first of all, that poor map. I'm just going back through the video. Look at it. That made me sad. As somebody who studies a lot of maps, that made me incredibly sad seeing that wine. I presume it is spill over that and completely ruining it. But yeah, so that verse goes, in peace and in battle, wherever the road goes. Around our king the guard stands. For land and for kingdom they sacrifice their lives. Knee to knee the bodyguard goes. Fought for the country's father. Dedicated servant for 500 years from the train across the belt. Battleland on Narva's field. They follow in the footsteps of heroes. For Sweden in time, there the king goes. They do what seems impossible. Whatever the future holds. Wherever the road leads. To protect, the guard swears. For king and kingdom they dedicate his life. Honour the life guard stands. Founded by the father of the country. Dedicated service of 500 years. From train across the belt. Stand at land on Narva's field. They follow in the footsteps of heroes. So again, and in the music video as well, I do believe, I'm not the best at portraits. I'm more, when I'm talking about portraits, it's more British people that I'm more recognising of. However, and I'm trying to find it now, I do believe in the background here, those are portraits of Charles, the three Charles in succession, the kind of where we get the Caroline period of Swedish kind of culture, basically, which is what the band members are kind of dressed as. You had the Charleses, or the Charles following in succession, Charles the 10th, 11th and 12th, if I'm not mistaken. And presumably, you know, during this time as well, again, I don't know particularly the story having a read through the lyrics here. I don't know if it's just talking about the lifeguards as a whole, rather than just when they're just talking about the Battleland. But basically, having the portraits of Charles, the three Charleses, basically. The lifeguards followed him wherever they went, so they required a kind of system, the three Charles, of kind of having this flexibility around them, enable them to carry out both their military needs and their governance kind of needs on the fly and on campaign, and that was what the lifeguards served a kind of vital role at doing. And this was particularly seen during the numerous Northern Wars. I mean, it's easier for me to say the Northern Wars, because there was about 5, 6, 7 different ones. I mean, the Great Northern War, I think, is actually technically the third Northern War. But then you have other skirmishes between Sweden and Poland, Sweden and Russia, Sweden and Denmark, Norway, and, you know, various other things. There's a reason why that some people have, you know, the book that's probably the most famous book written about this time, although fictional, is called The Deluge, because it seemed like a deluge because of constant wars coming from the north and that kind of region. But yeah, so the three Charles basically carried the lifeguards wherever they went. And, you know, and I'm not joking, because Sweden was at war throughout this period, practically with everyone around them. They was at war with Russia, Denmark, Norway, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and multiple other regions. At one time, they also invaded Germany, constantly involved in wars on the continent. And so the Caroline forces kind of needed a unit or an adoption of fighting that wouldn't kind of forsake them. And as the lyrics say, they sacrificed their lives, and that was very much true. But more so, what the lyric says, there the king goes, they do what seems impossible. And this is because, again, similar to what you talk about if you're talking about Sweden in modern day, Sweden is not a huge country. Sweden doesn't have a huge, vast population like, say, a Russia, or even, say, at the time, like a France or a Prussia type thing. And so they don't have these vast reserves of manpower to throw into wars and lose and just be able to trade those casualties. And as a result, it meant that the use of the Caroline forces during these fights, the Swedish forces, the Livgardet, all of them kind of combined to form the Caroline forces, was probably, in my opinion, one of the most effective military forces of its day, considering its relatively small stature. Due to its finding itself usually outnumbered in battles or in various skirmishes, what this meant was that the deployment of the Swedish forces needed to be kind of almost surgical. And where they made up for in their lack of numbers, this also meant that sometimes they were extremely proficient on the offensive. So they'd push the fact that they lacked numbers into pulling out these almost magnificent, marvellous kind of hyper-aggressive moves with bayonet and pike and various manners like that. And as a result, this enabled them to do what seemed like the impossible. And they won numerous brilliant victories from this. Taking large swaths in land in whatever northern wars that they actually won. And they was able to take significant land in the treaties. However, that was also a double-edged sword, because in the same vein as that, it meant that because the Swedish forces were kind of this small professional kind of elite force, the Lifeguards are part of this, it meant that also when they did take casualties and when they were defeated in battles, it could have a devastating effect. And this is ultimately why Sweden never really became a great power, as when you think about Britain or France or those types of nations, because really, as Gustav Adolphus kind of sent them on that meteoric rise with his reign, really after the defeat in the Great Northern War, Sweden never really kind of recovered to what it was pre that. And part of that is down to Charles XII actually being killed during the conflict, and I think some estimates put something like the Caroline forces suffered something like 60 to 70% casualty rates at the end of the Great Northern War, if you account for both military losses and those from disease or famine. Which, when you're talking about a small professional kind of army, when you lose 60 to 70% of your own troops, it makes it really hard to bounce back from that. And so as a result, Sweden never really recovered for that. But having said that, that didn't mean the Lifeguard didn't. And indeed, one of the most kind of famous things that Lifeguard is really supposed to have done, well, not supposed to have done, but been involved in, one of their kind of more glorified moments, if you will, or I don't know if that's entirely the correct word, or I don't know how it's perceived in Sweden. I only know from historiography of the time, but this is when Gustav III basically used and relied on the Lifeguards to overcome a kind of corrupt and deadlocked government. So you had the Swedish government, and I can't remember its name at the minute, but it was essentially a legislature, and it had a couple of factions in there who were constantly vying for attention against each other. They were constantly playing against each other's wheels, and ultimately nothing really was coming good of the country. And you had one particular faction within Swedish government called the Caps, and the Caps were essentially increasingly bringing Sweden under the Russian sphere of influence. And there was a real danger that they was thinking that Sweden might actually end up losing its independence to Russia. And you had Gustav III, who successfully was kind of having his powers kind of checked on. It was coming to the situation where the government was having more power than the king, and they was constantly trying to undermine his power. And fearing this, he first tried to mediate between the multiple factions in government, and he didn't succeed. Neither of the factions were really willing to come together and, mediate through him to try and actually come to a workable relation. And then coupled on to what I said earlier with the caps, increasingly making this worry that Sweden might just become like a puppet state to the Russian Empire. What Gustav done was he decided to take action. And that is where, over a period of time, he gathered his most trusted officers among the Swedish military. And went to the Livgardet as well, where he held a speech in front of them. And I'm trying to remember what it was, but essentially, from what I can remember from the last time that I've read it, it's been a few years. I haven't studied it since university, really. But I seem to remember somewhere along the lines of he was trying to appeal to these, to Gustav Adolphus's kind of image of the past, and he was basically, his own namesake, so to speak, and he was saying like, "Will you follow me like you would have followed Gustav Adolphus, because if you do, then I can do the absolute best for Sweden, for this country." And as a result, the Lifeguards were extremely committed to him, as the song goes. Where is it? Where is the lyrics for the guards? Yeah, for king and kingdom they dedicate his life. Honour the Lifeguard stands to protect and serve. No matter who wears the crown, to their king fidelity swears. In a time of peace they exist, traditions of the past. And so, much like the lyrics suggest, the Guard were ultimately committed to him, along with the other officers of the military, must be added. And then, through a coordinated effort, they seized the Swedish fleet in other parts of the country, and then they marched on the Privy Council and arrested the entire Privy Council. And then from there, it kind of gets a little bit less glamorous as Gustav III goes from making kind of more Enlightenment kind of changes, like, torture and stuff like that, not being so cool anymore, but at the same time, then progressively he extended his powers more and more until it began to kind of drift back towards an absolute monarchy, so to speak. But that wasn't so much the Lifeguards doing from that point there. But the point is, the Lifeguards played a pivotal role in securing kind of power for Gustav III, the king, as was their duty as Lifeguards to the king. And that can't really be understated, and I think it's really cool. I mean, I apologise for this. It hasn't so much been me talking about the song lyrics, because I don't necessarily know that it's about a specific event. I feel like it's more almost a love letter towards the Swedish Lifeguards as themselves, and that's a perfectly fine thing to do, because it is cool. The Lifeguards are cool. As I said, the first and second troop of the Household Cavalry, the Horse Guards, they developed from the English Civil War, and the third troop of Horse Guards as well, that was later disbanded, was made up of exiled royalists during the war. And obviously now we have the Lifeguards regiments, but that's not really that doesn't really hark back to the Civil War era. That's more of a more recent 20th century kind of regiment, along with the kind of the Blues and Royals of the Household Cavalry type of thing. And I know of the Danish Lifeguards, but I don't actually know much about their history themselves, which is something that I should probably learn about more. But I've tried to fill in what I know based on around this song. Apologies again for not knowing Swedish, and again, if when I've read out the translation to the lyrics, if I've read them out wrong, or the lyrics are wrong themselves, and there are any native Swedish speakers, then please do inform me, because as I said, I am an Englishman. I speak English and I speak broken French and German. That's kind of my limits of foreign language expertise, and so I am very much going off the translation of what I found on Google. So if not, then I apologise for that. But without further ado, I have a number of videos coming up as well. Again, I'm trying to get back to a routine of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm nearly at 500 subscribers, or I might have already passed it by this point, in which case, for any of you watching or any of you who have subscribed, I thank you ever so much for this. I didn't anticipate 500 already, particularly when I went away for about 4 or 5 months due to work and pandemic situations and stuff like that. So thank you ever so much for that. As always, if there are any recommendations, then please leave them in the comments. If there's any criticism or constructive feedback, then please leave that in the comments as well, because I want to make this the best thing that it can possibly be, and the only way that I'm going to do that is by listening to you guys. And so thank you ever so much for watching this. Thank you ever so much for listening to a ramble. Thank you for 500, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you ever so much for watching. The link will be in the description to the original video as always, and please stay safe. Thank you. Bye bye.